Friends, listeners, we are living inside an empire. We don't often call it that. We use other words, a superpower, a hegemon, the leader of the free world. But the patterns of history have a name for a nation that projects its military, economic, and cultural influence to every corner of the globe, that shapes the international order in its own image, and that believes its moment of supremacy is both permanent and divinely ordained. That name is empire, and empires, without exception, fall. Today, we will embark on a journey through the ruins of three of history's most formidable empires: the Roman Empire, the Spanish Empire, and the British Empire. We will dissect the fatal flaws that led to their downfalls. And then, with unflinching clarity, we will see how the United States of America is not an exception to this historical rule, but is, in fact, walking the same well-trod path toward decline. This is not a prediction of a specific date or a single catastrophic event, but a diagnosis of a deep systemic condition, a cancer that has infected every empire in its twilight. Our story begins not in the New World, but in the ancient one. Part 1. The Eternal City That Wasn't. The Fall of Rome. For centuries, Rome was the world. Its legions were invincible, its laws were civilization, and its roads connected a vast, diverse territory from the misty highlands of Britain to the deserts of Arabia. The phrase, "Rome has spoken, the case is closed," encapsulated a sense of final, unquestionable authority. But by the 5th century AD, the western half of this colossus had crumbled. Why? The first cause was economic overstretch and internal decay. Rome's economy was built on two shaky pillars: plunder from new conquests and a vast slave class. When the empire stopped expanding, the plunder dried up. There were no new Egypts to conquer, no new Carthages to loot. Without this constant influx of wealth, Rome had to sustain its immense military and bureaucratic apparatus through heavy, suffocating taxation on its own citizens and provinces. This bred resentment and crippled internal economic innovation. The rich senatorial class hoarded unimaginable wealth, building vast private villas while the state's coffers dwindled. The middle class of small farmers was wiped out, their lands bought up by aristocrats to create massive slave-run plantations. Sound familiar? Think of the end of American industrial might, the collapse of the middle-class dream, the soaring national debt that fuels consumption today but mortgages tomorrow, and the extreme concentration of wealth in the hands of a tiny elite. The parallels are stark. The second cause was military overextension and the barbarization of the army. At its height, the Roman Empire stretched over 2.5 million square miles. Defending borders that long against constant pressure from Germanic tribes, Persians, and others was astronomically expensive. The Roman army became a bloated, all-consuming beast that the economy could no longer feed. To fill its ranks, Rome began recruiting the very barbarians it was meant to keep out. These mercenaries fought for pay, not for loyalty to the idea of Rome. Their primary allegiance was to their generals, not to a distant emperor or a senate in Rome. This eroded the civic-military bond that had been key to Rome's early strength. Now, compare this to the United States. With around 800 military bases in over 70 countries, the US military is stretched thinner than any force in history. The economic cost is staggering, diverting trillions of dollars from infrastructure, education, and healthcare. And while the American military is professional, a profound cultural and political chasm has opened between the all-volunteer force and the civilian population it serves. The citizen soldier is a relic. The military is now a separate, often idealized, but deeply isolated class. The third cause was political corruption and instability. The later Roman Empire was a revolving door of emperors, many of them rising from the military, seizing power through civil war, and being assassinated within a few years. The Praetorian Guard, the emperor's own protectors, became kingmakers, auctioning the throne to the highest bidder. This chronic instability made long-term planning impossible and eroded faith in the central government. Is it so different today? We see a political system gripped by paralyzing partisanship, where gerrymandering and big money have corrupted the representational ideal. The peaceful transfer of power, a bedrock of Republican stability, was violently challenged on January 6. Public trust in Congress, the presidency, and the Supreme Court is at historic lows. A house divided against itself cannot stand, and Rome proved it first. Finally, there was the erosion of the unifying idea. What did it mean to be Roman? Initially, it meant a shared belief in the republic, in law, in a certain civic virtue. As the empire grew, citizenship was extended to all free inhabitants, which was a brilliant move, but it diluted the core identity. In the end, there was no central binding idea left to hold the empire together. People identified more with their local region or their military commander than with Rome. In America, the melting pot ideal is fracturing. The shared narrative of what it means to be an American is contested, politicized, and often rejected. We are retreating into competing identities based on politics, race, and class. Without a common story, a common purpose, an empire becomes just a collection of territories waiting to break apart. Rome didn't fall in a day. It was a long, slow unraveling, a death by 1,000 cuts. And as the lights went out in Europe, a new power was rising in the Iberian Peninsula. Part 2. The empire on which the sun never set, the twilight of Spain. In the 16th and 17th centuries, Spain was the first true global superpower. Its conquistadors toppled the Aztec and Inca empires, and its galleons filled with American silver made it the wealthiest nation in Europe. Its territories spanned the globe, prompting King Charles V to boast that the sun never set on his domains. Yet, this golden age was built on a foundation of sand. The primary cause of Spain's collapse was a resource curse and a failure to develop a productive economy. Spain stumbled upon a mountain of silver in Potosi and mines in Mexico. For a century, a river of precious metal flowed into Seville. But this incredible wealth proved to be a poison. Instead of investing in agriculture, industry, or manufacturing, the Spanish crown and aristocracy used the silver to finance endless wars against the Ottomans, the Dutch, the English, and the French. They bought what they needed from other countries: cloth from the Netherlands, weapons from Italy, grain from the Baltic. This created massive inflation at home and deindustrialized the Spanish economy. They were consumers, not producers. When the silver flows inevitably slowed and the costs of their wars mounted, the state was driven to bankruptcy, not once, but multiple times. The wealth had flowed through its fingers, leaving no lasting productive capacity. The United States has its own version of the resource curse. While not a single mineral, it is the US dollar's status as the world's reserve currency. This exorbitant privilege, as a French minister called it, allows America to print money and run staggering trade and budget deficits with impunity because the world is hungry for dollars. It lets us live beyond our means, importing goods from China and financing our government debt with foreign purchases of treasury bonds. But this, like Spanish silver, creates a hollow economy. It has enabled the offshoring of our manufacturing base and the rise of a financialized economy that generates wealth through speculation rather than production. What happens when the world begins to lose faith in the dollar? We are already seeing moves by China, Russia, and even allies to trade in other currencies. The end of the dollar's supremacy would be like the end of the Spanish silver fleets, a catastrophic shock to an economy unprepared for self-sufficiency. The second cause was rigid orthodoxies and the expulsion of vital human capital. At the peak of its power, Spain was fiercely, dogmatically Catholic. The Spanish Inquisition hunted down heretics and enforced religious conformity. This led to the expulsion of the Jews and later the Moriscos, Muslims who had converted to Christianity. This was not just a moral crime. It was an act of profound economic self-sabotage. These communities contained many of Spain's most skilled artisans, merchants, and doctors. Their expulsion crippled Spanish commerce and intellect just as its rivals were embracing a more pragmatic and tolerant approach. The Netherlands, for example, welcomed Jewish merchants and free-thinking intellectuals, and they became the financial and scientific engine of Europe. In America, we see a different but equally dangerous form of ideological rigidity. Our political discourse has become a form of secular theology. Compromise is heresy. Scientific facts on issues from climate change to pandemics are rejected if they conflict with political identity. This paralysis prevents us from tackling existential threats. Furthermore, while America has historically been a magnet for global talent, the brain drain that powered our innovation, we are now erecting barriers, both physical and political, that threaten that influx. In a global competition for the best and brightest, a turn towards nativism and isolation is the modern equivalent of expelling your most productive citizens. The third cause was strategic overcommitment and military stagnation. Spain's vast empire was a strategic nightmare to defend. Its famous armada was defeated by the smaller, more nimble English fleet. Its mighty tercio infantry squares, once invincible, were eventually outmaneuvered by more flexible Dutch and Swedish tactics. Spain was constantly fighting on multiple fronts, from the Netherlands to the Americas to the Mediterranean, bleeding its treasury dry while its enemies innovated. The US finds itself in a similar predicament. We are committed by treaty to defend dozens of nations across the globe. Our military, while technologically advanced, is optimized for fighting a type of war, large-scale conventional conflict, that is less and less common, while struggling against asymmetric threats like guerrilla warfare and cyber attacks. Meanwhile, rivals like China are rapidly modernizing their forces, focusing on areas like hypersonic missiles and cyber warfare to challenge American dominance in specific, critical domains. The cost of maintaining global primacy is becoming unsustainable, just as it was for Spain. Spain collapsed from the inside out, bankrupted by its own easy wealth and blinded by its dogmatic certainty. As its power waned, a new, more nimble empire arose from a rainy set of islands, Great Britain. Part 3. The Lion's Last Roar, the End of the British Empire. The British Empire was the largest in history. It was built not on conquistadors' zeal, but on sea power, trade, finance, and the Industrial Revolution. It was a commercial and industrial leviathan. Its collapse was not a sudden military defeat, but a gradual, relentless transfer of power. The first and most crucial factor was the loss of economic supremacy. Britain was the workshop of the world, but by the late 19th century, new industrial powers emerged, Germany and most formidably, the United States. The US had a larger population, vast natural resources, and a more massive, integrated domestic market. By World War I, America was outproducing Britain. By World War II, Britain was financially exhausted, saved only by American Lend-Lease aid, which came at a price: the liquidation of British overseas assets and the acceptance of the dollar, not the pound, as the world's premier currency. The Suez Crisis of 1956 was the final, humiliating confirmation. When Britain, France, and Israel invaded Egypt, the United States, fearing a wider conflict with the Soviets, used its financial leverage to force a British withdrawal. The message was clear: London could no longer act independently on the world stage without the approval and financial backing of Washington. The master had become the client. The United States is now in a similar position relative to China. For decades, we were the world's largest economy and its undisputed technological leader. China is now, by some measures, the largest economy in the world. It is the world's manufacturing floor, a leader in 5G, artificial intelligence, and renewable energy. It is challenging American technological dominance across the board. And just as Britain became financially dependent on the US is financially intertwined with and in some ways dependent on China, which holds trillions of our debt and is a primary source of the goods we consume. The relationship is symbiotic but also fraught with peril, mirroring the Anglo-American transition. The second cause was the rise of nationalist independence movements. The British Empire was held together by force, racial paternalism, and the myth of the white man's burden. But this could not withstand the spread of ideas of self-determination. In India, the nonviolent resistance led by Gandhi and the Indian National Congress exposed the moral bankruptcy of British rule. After the immense sacrifice of Indian soldiers in 2 world wars, the demand for independence became unstoppable. The same story played out across Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. The empire was dismantled piece by piece, not because Britain wanted it, but because it could no longer afford the financial and moral cost of suppressing these movements. The American empire is different. It's not a territorial empire in the classic sense, but it is a system of global influence maintained through military alliances, economic pressure, and cultural dominance. And this system is facing its own independence movements. We see it in the rise of resurgent powers like China and Russia, who explicitly seek to create a post-American world. We see it in allies like Saudi Arabia and Turkey pursuing their own interests with increasing disregard for Washington's wishes. We see it in the global South nations that are no longer automatically aligning with the West, choosing instead to play the great powers against each other. The unipolar moment of the 1990s is over. The world is pushing back against American hegemony, just as the colonies pushed back against the British crown. Finally, there was the exhaustion of the imperial will. After the horrors of 2 world wars, the British people were tired. The national mission shifted from glory and conquest to building a welfare state at home, the National Health Service. The moral certainty that had justified empire evaporated. The public no longer had the stomach for the sacrifices required to hold on to distant lands. In America, we see a similar war weariness after 2 decades of conflict in Afghanistan and Iraq. There is a growing bipartisan desire to focus on problems at home: crumbling infrastructure, social division, economic inequality, a sentiment often labeled as isolationist, but is better understood as a reprioritization of domestic needs over imperial burdens. The will to be the world's policeman is fading. Part 4. The American Synthesis, a Perfect Storm. Now we bring these threads together. The American predicament is not defined by one of these historical ailments, but by a synthesis of all of them. We are experiencing the perfect storm. Like Rome, we suffer from deep internal decay, a rotting infrastructure, a vanishing middle class, extreme political polarization, and a collapse of civic trust and shared narrative. Our political institutions appear as corrupt and dysfunctional as the late Roman Senate. Like Spain, we are victims of our own financial privilege, living off the dollar's reserve status while our industrial base erodes. We are plagued by ideological rigidity that prevents pragmatic problem-solving, and we are militarily overstretched trying to manage crises on every continent. Like Britain, we are witnessing the inevitable rise of a peer competitor in China, who challenges our economic and technological supremacy. Our network of global alliances is becoming more fragile and expensive to maintain, and the public's appetite for endless foreign entanglements is waning. This is the arc of empire. It is not a random collection of events. It is a cycle, identifiable and brutal in its logic. The historian Paul Kennedy, in his seminal work, The Rise and Fall of the Great Powers, identified the core mechanism: imperial overstretch. A nation's global military and political commitments eventually grow beyond its economic capacity to sustain them. The empire is forced to choose between retrenchment, risking a power vacuum, or doubling down, accelerating its bankruptcy. The United States is in the grips of this very dilemma, but there is one final modern accelerant that Rome, Spain, and Britain did not face: the climate crisis. The coming decades will bring resource scarcity, mass migration, and political instability on a global scale. As the world's reigning superpower and a primary historical contributor to the problem, the United States will be expected to lead the response and bear a disproportionate share of the cost. Yet our political system is arguably the least capable among advanced democracies of mustering a coherent, long-term response to this existential threat. The climate crisis will act as a multiplier of all our other weaknesses, straining our military, our economy, and our social fabric to the breaking point. The choice of legacy. The collapse of an empire is not necessarily the collapse of the nation. After Rome fell, the idea of Rome lived on, inspiring future generations. Spain and Britain are still prosperous, respected nations. They are just no longer empires. The end of the American empire would not mean the end of the United States, but it would mean the end of its unquestioned global dominance. The question before us is not if the American empire will recede, but how it will happen. Will it be a managed, graceful decline, where we consciously reinvest in our domestic strengths, foster new partnerships on a basis of equality rather than dominance, and guide the world toward a stable multipolar order? Or will it be the Roman path, a protracted, painful unraveling marked by internal strife, financial crisis, and a loss of global respect? History offers a grim warning. Empires rarely choose the graceful exit. They are usually too proud, too blind, too trapped by their own past successes to see the future clearly. They believe their own mythology of exceptionalism until the very end. The fate of the American empire is not yet sealed in stone, but it is written in the warnings of history. We have the unique, terrible privilege of being able to read those warnings. The question is, do we have the wisdom to heed them? The cycles of history are powerful, and they are turning. The only thing truly exceptional about America will be whether it can learn from the ghosts of empires past before it becomes one of them. If you found this deep dive into the fate of empires valuable, come join our free Discord community. We discuss these ideas further and share essential financial insights to help you prepare for what's next. The invite link is in the description.